has representation from Tiffany and Laura. So in that case, I think we're good to go. So I'll just start by saying my name is James Pepper. I'm the chair of the Cannabis Control Board. Today is December 18th, 2024. And I call this meeting of the Act 166, Section 15A Social Equity Work Group to order. Okay, so I really just want to thank everyone for your continued willingness to participate with us in this work group. I just wanted to quickly recap some of the work that we've done to date. In our first meeting, which I think was in August, we reviewed Act 166, the relevant section of that. The board kind of presented an overview of the market, including some of the unique features and challenges of it. ACCD, Tim Tierney, walked through the kind of history of the Cannabis Business Development Fund. And then Office of Racial Equity kind of gave an update on some of the work that they had previously done for an Act 65 report related to social equity. Meeting 2, we heard from the administrator of the Massachusetts Cannabis Social Equity Trust Fund, how that fund is governed and how money is kind of allocated there. We heard from the Cannabis Retailers Association about some of their priorities related to social equity. We heard from the Cannabis Equity Coalition's 2024 priorities. That's Mark, Jeffrey, and Graham. And then we heard some of the work that Rhodes has done directly from Rhodes with our social equity licensees. Meeting 3, which is in November, we heard from VSU, specifically Tim Egan and Phil Lammy, about a curriculum that they could put together to support social equity educational programs. We heard about the work that Form and Forest Viability does to support non-cannabis agriculture in the state. And we heard from the LAOB with Gina Ornella about the Land Access and Opportunity Board. So the only real agenda item today is to look through that outline that I sent, and it really is an outline. It's meant to be kind of a skeleton, and we're going to try and fill in the gaps. We don't have to get through the whole thing today. This report is due on January 15th, so there's still a little bit of time to kind of fine tune it and make sure that we're all kind of on the same page. And I think there's 3 parts to that report. The first part is totally unrelated to this work group. It's a recurring report that we have to write every 2 years with the support of the Office of Racial Equity and ACCD, just about the social equity program in general, how it's going, what work has been done there to date, what are the continued barriers to accessing the cannabis market. And then the second part of the January 15th report is, I think, going to be directly responsive to the question that was asked, which is what percentage of the excise tax should be dedicated on an annual basis to support the Cannabis Business Development Fund. And then I think the third piece of this report is let's talk about community reinvestment and how cannabis excise tax money may be used to support social equity or equity initiatives outside of the cannabis context. So before we do that, this is a public meeting, and so I would like to just pause for public comment. I would just note that I think everyone in the room is a named stakeholder or has just been participating from the beginning, and this is meant to be an open discussion. So really, you don't have to just hold for public comment. This will be a discussion. But if there's anyone that would like to make a general public comment at the outset, feel free to just kind of raise your hand or jump in. Okay, I will close the public comment window and move down the agenda, which is just to review the draft report. I'll start by just pulling it up. And hopefully that. See that. So is everyone seeing that screen, my screen? Yep. Okay. So the way that this has happened in the past, and we're not bound by anything, is the board tries to make a PowerPoint. And so instead of an actual, traditional report, it's a PowerPoint, mostly because we usually are presenting it to a committee and they prefer something that's easily digestible. So this is the outline that I think will be translated into a final PowerPoint. And I usually start with kind of a quick overview. I mentioned that the work that this group is doing is kind of a tack on to a biennial report. This is the biennial report that's due. Again, ACCD, Executive Director of Racial Equity, and the Cannabis Board will report on the number of social equity applicants, the number of recipients of any sort of grants or loans from the Cannabis Business Development Fund, and then identification of continuing barriers to accessing the cannabis market for social equity applicants. So I'm not going to go through that data yet because we're still putting it together, and it's not necessarily relevant to this work.
Can I ask a quick question about it? Because I have been confused over the last few meetings. Is that data aggregated or disaggregated into the different social equity groups, or it's only all together as one social equity group?
So we've only submitted this report one time, and it was when the entire cannabis program was less than a year old. So we can do whatever we want. We can disaggregate it for sure. And I think we should probably.
I don't think it was at that time.
Okay, got it.
I think we maybe only had a handful of social equity applicants at the time. So, this report will be the real, you can see January 15th, 2023, the market opened in October 1st of 2022. Okay. It's very fresh. No problem. But so then this is kind of the work of this group, which is, again, working with these named stakeholders about how much excise tax should be placed into this Cannabis Business Development Fund. So I do think that the question about what percentage is very relevant to the barriers to accessing. So I did start, even though this is part of the kind of foundational report, I did want to include it in this because I think it's important for us to all really bulk up this section, because this really is kind of what the fund is meant to accommodate. The kind of challenges to accessing the industry and the kind of challenges to remaining viable within the industry. So, we've heard over and over again, access to capital. We know this is true, especially given the illegal status at the federal level. The American Banking Association takes the position that serving marijuana-related businesses, which is a term of art they use for any company that directly touches the plant. They have kind of like a different category for people that work primarily with marijuana businesses but never touch the plant. Like if you're a printer and you only print labels for marijuana businesses, cannabis businesses, all of your profit is derived from cannabis sales, but you're in a different category than people that actually touch the plant. But they feel, the American Banking Association feels that there's significant legal risk under the Banking Secrecy Act to banking marijuana-related profits from marijuana-related businesses. And so they've advised anyone who's a federally chartered bank to not deal with cannabis businesses. No lending, no lines of credit, no depository accounts, just don't do it. Some banks are willing to, FDIC insured, federally chartered banks are willing to take those risks. not in the lending context, but in the depository account context, but very few in Vermont actually are willing to do that. Coincidentally, the state chartered credit unions take the opposite approach. Their National Credit Union Association says, no, these are businesses like any other. Please bank their money. It's an important part of your mission. And so they do. And I think we have at least 5 or 6 in the state that actually provide basic banking services to cannabis businesses, although few, if any, are offering any sort of loans to cannabis businesses, which means that every business in Vermont has to be made up of capital that's private capital. And that offers some real unique challenges to this industry, especially in a state like Vermont that doesn't have a ton of, very wealthy people. And then we have also, just to add a layer of complexity, have a 1 license per entity rule, meaning that a venture capitalist in Vermont who may want to see like, oh, well, we can have we can have a chain of retailers and maybe that'll be profitable, something worth investing in. That wouldn't be allowed here. And then of course, we're talking about social equity applicants in this context, the barriers to access for social equity applicants. And, social equity by definition is individuals who have been directly harmed by cannabis prohibition, or individuals from communities that have been disproportionately negatively impacted by cannabis prohibition historically. And so anyone with a criminal history record that's been incarcerated, is very likely going to be deemed high risk by a lender, no matter what. And so even if there were any sort of avenues for lending, very unlikely, there'd still be negative impact for social equity applicants specifically. There's no funding available through any federal agencies, USDA, SBA, or otherwise. There's always this kind of cannabis tax that gets tacked on to any cannabis business. When it comes to banking, we're hearing it's, a normal banking fee is what, maybe like $15 or $25 a month for a cannabis business. For a depository account only, it can be upwards of $1,500 a month. Insurance, there are no admitted insurers, meaning every insurance provider is a surplus line insurer. They're not regulated by anyone, and they can charge whatever they want, and they can kind of hide a lot of exclusions in their fine print. We consistently see cannabis businesses get charged more for rent under the theoretical risk that there might be a raid on their property or something along those lines. And then there's very few tax professionals that understand 280E or some of the kind of unique nature of tax prep for cannabis money, and very few kind of lawyers that really understand this kind of, this business.
Would it make sense to add to this too, just that these businesses don't have the benefit of 280E at all, so they're paying more?
I put that down under the challenges to a sustainable success.
Okay,
yeah. No, I mean, I don't know if there's more to be said about access to capital that we want to say.
Yeah.
And then access to land is just in this section probably needs some real beefing up. I mean, I know we have any number of statistics. If Mark were here, he knows them off the back of this, about just the kind of inequities in land ownership. I mean, mm-hmm. I know I've seen your reports as well. Mm-hmm. In fact, I pulled this from one of your reports, or at least from your enabling statute at the LAOB, that Land Act, there's a very inequitable distribution of land, or demographically at least, when it comes to land ownership in Vermont. We require, for a few reasons, that you provide proof of ownership, the right to occupy. I guess not proof of ownership, but the right to occupy the physical location of your operation. And that can be very challenging for social equity applicants. And then, of course, I mentioned the kind of predatory lease arrangements for cannabis businesses. And then we have this new outdoor siting restriction, which really is kind of pushing some people out of their homes, which which wouldn't allow people to kind of cultivate outside in their backyard in some contexts.
So currently, can you grow in your home, indoor and outdoor?
Yes, with some caveats.
Okay,
yes.
and then what does that do? The outdoor
So
setting?
there was some disputes among neighbors
Okay.
with outdoor cannabis and odor.
Yeah.
So the legislature in response mandated essentially a 50-foot setback from every property
Got it.
line. The idea was to hopefully kind of move outdoor cannabis cultivation out of densely populated neighborhoods.
Right.
Of course, like, you know,
Mhm.
you have your house, you don't have somewhere else. So
Yeah.
you can't cultivate in your house. That means you just can't cultivate, period.
Got it.
So we can beef up this section, I assume, maybe with some statistics about land ownership and the disparities there. And I don't know if we want to get into any other barriers to accessing the cannabis industry. I guess let me just go through the challenges to
Pepper, are you
sustainable
aware of
success.
Are you aware of any of our social equity applicants that have mentioned land access?
We had to do an analysis about how these outdoor siting restrictions are impacting existing licensees. And the impact, I think, is about 11 existing licensees are going to be either partially or totally zoned out of existence, essentially. We'll do an analysis as to how that impacts social equity licensees.
We did do that.
Okay, yeah.
I think it was 2 that we were certain were going to be impacted.
Yeah.
But then we really don't know how, I mean, because we don't know that we knew like the size of the property and that's how we determined the impact, but we don't know on the other properties, like what the topography is, whether or not there's wetlands. So there's a possible larger universe of impacted people that we're really not certain.
Right.
Got it.
As far as the question about the universe of people that never got in because they don't own their property and they can't lease property or their landlord won't allow them to grow cannabis at it, we don't know the answer to that. But certainly you're not allowed by DOJ kind of rule or FinCEN rule, you're not allowed to grow on any sort of like Section 8 housing, for instance. So all of that is out. Any landlord can restrict cannabis grow or kind of certain operations.
As is anything that is in land trust, right?
I think
Contracted with the
so,
NRCS.
yeah.
Oh, because of NRCS.
Yes, that's what we
Got it.
think, yes.
Yeah, maybe I'll just add some notes here.
Mhm.
I reached out to the land trust to try and connect with them and ask.
Okay. Susanna? Susanna, you may be muted. I don't see. I'm not hearing you. Oh, no, you're not. I'm not hearing you if you are talking.
I'm
Oh, there
saying
you
words. Words.
Yes,
Okay.
got you now. Yeah.
Yeah, they forced the Windows update on me, and now nobody can hear me. Thank you. I know I'm sort of kind of recused from this group, and we have our office staff here representing, so I won't really say much, but I just wanted to add 2 things that may be helpful just as information points. Earlier, we talked about disparities in access to land and particularly to home ownership. And I know you'd mentioned a couple of sources of data. VHFA also has a lot of data on that, so it may be worth checking with them for some information about that, particularly in terms of financing. And then another piece is we talked a little bit about the number of licensees who are or may be impacted by zoning restrictions. And I think it might be worth planning to do another analysis of that nature in the future, given that we just had a local and national election, and that may have changed the political composition of municipalities in Vermont to the point where towns where we didn't think this would be a zoning issue, it may suddenly be one, depending on if there are ideological changes to those local zoning boards. That's the most charitable way I could put it. So that might be a worthwhile data project in the near future.
your comment also just reminded me that there's a situation where one of our licensees wanted to kind of use a portion of his property, but the town considered it a change of use. You know, he was growing hemp in one part or tomatoes in one part, and then, you know, they thought that hemp would have been or cannabis would have been a change of use, and they refused to give him a change of use permit also. So yeah. So the challenges to actually succeeding in this industry, and so maybe I can just change the phrasing here. One is just seasonal oversupply. I mean, you know, essentially every October when people are harvesting their plants, the price crashes. And unless you have a great strategy for kind of storage and shelf stability, you know, you have to kind of ride this very difficult all outdoor cultivators in particular are subject to, you know, intense weather, including flooding that can be kind of devastating immediately, you know, ruin an entire crop. There's also just general pests and diseases. You know, not everyone can just do controlled. This is just a synonym for indoor cultivation. Very expensive setup and very expensive ongoing costs. There's only 2 testing facilities in the state, both of which are in Colchester, meaning the kind of southern half of the state has to really plan ahead for when they want to test. There's very limited opportunities for technical assistance. Cultivators really are reliant on kind of the people down the supply chain for their market access. There's no real opportunity short of buying a retail license to go direct to consumer. Also, you know, we talked about this in the first meeting. Tourism and border state consumers represent a outsized portion of the demand for cannabis in the state. And when we have things like flooding that splash all around the front page of the New York Times and people just don't come to Vermont as a result, or you know, New York, a lot of their border consumers were coming to Vermont to consume. You know, a lot of our modeling is built upon kind of a static picture of demand, but the demand shifts when those types of things happen. And you know, the cultivators feel that shift the hardest. There's you know, this is something we've talked about frequently, you know, this kind of drib drab of money going into the Cannabis Business Development Fund, which has never been kind of sustainable or kind of ongoing, just makes strategic planning for that fund difficult. Obviously, the regulatory, like the burden of complying with our regulations and also the Act 250 regulations and every, you know, water quality regulations, all the regulations that apply to cannabis cultivation, they tend to add up. There's a, you know, 280E, this is a section of the tax code that requires cannabis operators to pay taxes on all aspects of their business. So they don't get to write anything off, like, you know, wages, any sort of capital improvements. There's nothing that they have to pay. They just have a disproportionate tax burden compared to any other small business, including the intoxicating hemp industry that are, you know, cultivating hemp. They're making synthetic cannabinoids using that hemp. They're putting it into products, shipping it through interstate commerce, and they don't have to worry about 280E. They can write off all of their business expenses on their federal tax returns. They don't have to pay extra for insurance or bank accounts. And this market is taking a big chunk out of the demand for regulated cannabis in the state. So I don't know if anyone has any other kind of, you have to really kind of be involved with the cannabis industry to really understand the kind of, you know, existential threats to it. But I don't know if anyone wants to add anything to this list. mean, essentially, I'm trying to build a case for why this fund needs to be actually funded on a sustainable basis. Did I see a hand go up? Was that Nathan?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I just wanted to understand the limited opportunities for technical assistance a bit more. Is that talking about in the social equity program, cannabis business development fund side of things, or in the private market?
I see what I am thinking about is, there's no access to the Small Business Administration. There's no access to support from USDA. And then all of the state programs that we've established, whether that be, through the farm and forest viability or state supported programs, I should say, they just won't deal with cannabis businesses. They have the option to just say this is federally illegal, and we just don't first of all, cannabis is not defined as farming in statute. It's defined as a commercial activity. So, there's just lots of opportunities that exist and supports that exist for farmers in the state and federally, and cannabis cultivators are not, they don't have access to them.
Okay. I think I understand what you're saying when you say technical assistance. Then sounds like government assistance, government funding, etc.
Yeah.
Okay.
And for all of these, I think I'm going to have in the final presentation little explanatory kind of sections to each. I have this slide that kind of shows that we got from the tourism department about the kind of how tourism fluctuates throughout the year in and year out over the past kind of couple of years. And you can really see that compared to just the number of purely 21 plus residents of Vermont, the number of plus 21 tourists that we get here just eclipses the number of actual residents we have. So turning from kind of these barriers to access and success, trying to think about just generally what the recommendation is going to be with respect to purely the question around the Cannabis Business Development Fund. So I really believe that it should be expanded to include all tier 1 cultivators, because they are the ones that are really struggling. And, tier 1 really doesn't register as a viable business type in any other state. Most states, they start with like 2,500 or 5,000 square feet of canopy as the kind of like starting tier. And ours is 1,000 square feet. And there's even some discrepancies between what the definition of canopy includes. So just, it's a scale of business that is so small that I think they deserve some of the benefits of the fund. And you can see that in this recommendation, I didn't give them the full panoply of benefits that a social equity business would have, but I think that they're struggling. And if we want to have truly a craft market, that those tier 1 cultivators are the backbone of that. And we got to find a way to kind of provide some support to them.
That is also, I know we don't have this number up here, but it's also the license type that most social equity applicants are in, if I remember correctly. Yeah.
Tim?
Yeah, so this, my question here was that this would basically have to change the act to the law to basically include them in this, or was it worth examining, creating a separate fund where therefore you could then contract or provide tier 1? I mean, will it complicate it by changing the act? I guess is what my question is.
I don't think it'll complicate things too much. I think the statutory change is relatively simple, just including small cultivators in the kind of authorized uses, but then in the funds, enabling statute, but then just saying that the grant program can only go to social equity businesses and the technical assistance can go to all people that qualify. That was my thinking, is to leave the kind of existing beneficiary payments just for social equity.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the next one down would be kind of leave the beneficiary payments, keep funding those beneficiary payments on an annual basis, but those would only be available to social equity businesses. We had a meeting with Liz on the side, and kind of like vetted some of these because she couldn't be here today. And some of these proposals with her, and she thought that really the kind of job of providing a network of support to social equity businesses would require 2 people, 2 FTEs to achieve appropriately. So the next recommendation would be to hire a cannabis business to fund administrator and services coordinator. And that their job would be to create a network of advisors at partner organizations that can provide technical assistance and support tailored to individual need. I was trying to think of the systems of support that we have for non-cannabis businesses. And it seems like Farm Forest Viability does a lot of the business planning, some of the supply chain logistics. What we heard from VSU is that they have a specialty in kind of regulatory, potentially tax compliant HR management. They can do some of the business planning work, land access and transfer. So this is where I would, I don't want to prejudge how to get this done, but I do think that we have a proposal on the table from the state colleges that I think could do this could be a partner organization to handle this kind of first prong of what I think is needed. The second prong, I look to the work that I think it's NOFA is doing, primarily, maybe rural Vermont as well, to do kind of on-demand work with cultivators that are having problems in kind of real time, but also preparing an upcoming season, or just kind of dealing with the basics of cultivation, including on-farm workshops, biosecurity. I mean, there's a lot of disease that you can prevent if you kind of take some proactive steps. Tim, go ahead.
Yeah. So, and looking over this, I mean, it was also, I mean, I didn't know if the establishment of hiring that person, or basically just providing contracts for a variety of people that can actually fulfill these skills or tasks. Just putting it out there.
I'm glad you weighed in, because the administration of this fund is something that I think we've heard over and over again. You guys aren't getting your normal kind of percentage for administering the fund.
And that's not even critical. It's more of the fact that growing government is actually putting in, I mean, I don't know what kind of position this would be, but I know it's not easy creating a new job in Vermont.
Right.
But to do contracts, and then actually you probably can get more for your buck through a contract, right? So
yeah, I assume that this would be contracted work, but I still think that there needs to be someone responsible for making sure to be the kind of intake person that that's kind of coordinating these services and establishing the partner advisors, and then also kind of being the intake for the social equity and tier 1 cultivators, and maybe doing some kind of basic logistics with them at the outset. Very similar, I think, to what Farm and Forest Viability does. They do some business planning at the outset, and then they kind of matchmake you with some partner advisors.
Right.
And I don't know if it needs to be 2. Liz said that it would be very challenging to do it with less than 2, but it's also just about scope. How many people are we talking? What's the universe of potential businesses? And how much support, how many partner organizations do they need?
Well, and with a contractor, you could get a team, right? And actually Farm and Forest and even UVM, they're contractors for many things, right? They're hired. So I just think it's just throwing it out there that I think the contracting process might be the easiest way to achieve this. And actually, you also could parse out all the different aspects and get the best potential people here, just like getting VSU could cover certain aspects, and then you can put it out and get people that can cover that whole gamut of what you're trying to do, and it could be 2 or 3 contracts to cover the whole thing.
Well,
and
frankly,
then one person could be the
yeah.
GC of it, like you're saying. One person can be the
Yeah.
main intake.
I mean, I'd love to be able to move this 300,000 down to, or split it between these other two kind of buckets. So yeah, I mean, I'm certainly amenable to that. I really, the thing I don't want to do is recreate the wheel at all. Tim, if you're telling me that that's how that ACCD kind of does this in other contexts, that'd be.
Well, it would be it'd be the fastest way to go to actually trying to create a position in government. It's just not very easy. And also, by the way, it's CBDF, just let you know.
Yeah, I remember. Yeah, that's right.
I do that too.
Yeah, sorry.
I thought you guys would have CBD down pretty well by now, I thought.
Yeah. Yeah.
Based on what I've seen of farm and forest viability, I think what's important to capture is what you just said. There is a central intake person. There's someone who's kind of looking at the scope of like, okay, who are all the cohort members? Like, what are their needs across? And then how do we farm that out? And so it sounds like what Tim, I hear you saying is basically move that $300,000 down to it's like establish a CBDF administrator and network of advisors. And that can all be contracted to $650,000.
Contract that out and put that as the scope of work, as what they need to do.
Right. And then there's no implication of some agency is hiring a staff person, but ACCD could receive all this money and contract VHCB to do it, for example.
Yes.
I'm not saying that's what would happen.
That is kind of what I wanted. Yes, I think that's great.
They're not allowed to do this though, if I'm correct, right? Because of the federal funds they receive.
Farm forest.
Yeah.
I think they are. They just can't use their farm like that because they get some federal money to support their current farm viability. They can't just roll cannabis applicant or cannabis licensees into the current farm viability program. But if there was a separate funding stream through here, they could establish a side program that functionally operates within the same infrastructure, but has its own funding. And so it's not in conflict with the restrictions on federal funds. That's my understanding, at least.
Yeah, I mean, they've got a board, and it's about their kind of risk appetite at the board. I think there's a way to structure it for sure. I mean, this isn't totally out of line with other states. Yeah.
I don't think the Vermont Sustainable Jobs Funds. I don't know if they get federal, but that's another group too. Yeah,
right.
They also receive federal funding, but it's
right. Well, and so that's the kind of three legs of this stool that I have. This is what the Vermont Sustainable Job Fund does. So really it is kind of like look at someone like VSU or Farm Forest Viability and try and replicate that on a contract basis or use them if they're willing to do it.
Or separate all three.
Yeah, it is possible. Yeah. Jeffrey?
Thanks, Chair. For the record, Jeffrey, Vermont Growers Association, one of the organizations in the Equity Coalition. I just want to very briefly lead up. Getting some feedback.
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, sorry. Here, let's turn.
Okay. Thank you. So just very briefly, an anecdote. Here at Vermont Growers Association, we speak with licensees on a daily basis. And I just want to share, I spoke with 2 licensees yesterday. They're SE applicants, they were not even aware of the ACCD program. So whatever that amounts to, I think the anecdote that I want to impart on y'all right now is if you can unify this portal or even, one agency for licensees to arrive at, the better, because you'll be meeting them where they're at. They visit the CCB very, very regularly and they're familiar with y'all. I just want to impart that on you. We often, even now, almost 3 years into this market, have to kind of clear up where they can go for financial assistance. So I just want to share that. Thank you.
Yeah, Jeffrey, we have incorporated that into our pre-qualification process where it was not before. So you get identified as a social equity applicant before you even apply for a license, and then you get connected with ACCD at that point. So I appreciate the feedback, but we put a step in the process that hopefully will address that. And then, yeah, the last piece is the kind of businesses, you know, kind of get people an understanding of the entire supply chain, the kind of what are the next steps in the supply chain, you know, how to connect with those, the professional development. I mean, the VSJF, to me is really about kind of like incubation and acceleration, and kind of when businesses are looking to make that leap to the kind of next to like level up. And I think that's they offer some really important services there. Nathan?
Yeah, so two things. One, wondering if this is going to be kind of a transfer of what Rhodes is currently doing towards this contracted work, or is it pretty much replacing Rhodes' contract? And would this include the tier 1 cultivators as well receiving these services?
You know, I'm not trying to prejudge who is going to do this work. You know, what I want to get is that kind of central administrator to really establish the needs and the players that can, you know, that can deliver those needs. So it could be Rhodes.
But in terms of scope, I think this would be a bigger scope than Rhodes currently has. Right, because this is including business planning and kind of assessing where people are at, whereas Rhodes is right now, you know, providing like a singular service. Like you need a logo, you need a little bit of accounting advice. Like this feels like bigger than the current Rhodes scope.
Yeah, I think it is. Yeah, but I mean that's not to say that they couldn't be part of this network.
Right.
You know, I see it as really a network, and Rhodes can certainly be a part of that if they're able to kind of do the work that's identified by the central administrator. Am I missing anything here? I mean, I'm looking towards ACCD and LAOB. You know, are there major? I mean, we need to really justify this and say that this is what, you know, small craft growers and social equity applicants need. Am I missing any kind of major needs?
I think that, I'm sorry, Tim, go ahead.
No, you go ahead. I'm good. You're good.
Okay. One of the needs that comes up for me is that given everything you've described about the industry and what you said about like other states don't even consider tier 1 size businesses viable at all, at some point you're going to get into like technical assistance is not going to solve this problem. And so having a feedback loop of like, okay, this is what we're learning from all of our clients that we're working with, and now we really see we need a direct market, or like whatever the sort of feedback into the regulatory system to increase. I mean, that's a little bit under value chain facilitation, but
so is that so this is, see, I've got to see this, like, yes, I thought about, you know, really, I mean, the kind of like aha moment that I was having, and I should just say, just to respond directly as well, is a tier 1 cultivator is not viable at like 1,000 square feet when you have 100,000 square feet facilities as well, which we don't have in Vermont.
Got it. I see what you're saying. Okay.
So like, you can either have a few kind of mega farms that are Walmart, and then you have some smaller ones that maybe can eventually compete with them. But the biggest we have, I think, is I think we have 15,000, and
but we also have a population that is like minuscule fraction of most other places.
Precisely.
So I think there's something about, and this is true in farm viability too. It's like, yes, there is the TA to the businesses, but there's a lot of improvements that have led to farm viability in our state is because we've been learning from the experiences on the ground and then wrapping that up into really strategic value chain facilitation, which has also led to some more muscle behind regulatory changes like on-farm slaughter. You know, like, okay, we really see we need to have these kinds of regulatory changes that allow for very small producers. So that's the only thing.
Yeah, and that's what I thought needs to happen almost immediately is this kind of strategic action plan, because we do have a number of years of experience now, and we hear quite a bit about the challenges, the existential challenges, and really, so I think that this needs to be step one, and we actually have money in our existing budget to do this, there's also money in the Cannabis Business Development Fund. So depending on how quickly we want to get this going, I think that it was really the kind of farm to plate strategic plan. I forget what it was that kind of made me think that if we can replicate that for cannabis, and these are just some of the issues that I think that this strategic plan should address immediately. And I do have kind of enable opportunities for direct to consumer sales as one of the pieces of it. But Mark, you're with us.
Oh, Mark's there.
Good afternoon, Chair, and good afternoon, everyone. I do apologize. I had an emergency come up and just want to jump right in there. I see we're on the recommendations, and I hear you're talking about the CBDF administrator and the services, and then the network of advisors. And I was wondering, it sounds like that's like almost the same thing. I guess what I'm getting at is that the I think the advisors and everything that comes after that is like another layer of, I think, what do you call it? Just, I don't know. I'm just wondering, I think the big picture here is we just need a CBDF administrator. We need to fund that. And I'm just wondering if we're not getting a little bit too far in the bushes when we start going down deeper and talking about the establishment of the network of advisors and all of the assistance, the forms of assistance that will come from that. Not to say it's not cool to talk about, but I'm just wondering if that shouldn't be just kind of beyond the scope of what we're here to do, because we could just keep taking a deep dive. The other observation that I have, and I'm sorry just to come in hot like this, but Pepper, you and I were talking earlier today about some of this, and I was excited to get to the conversation. The VSJF, the whole, what that looks like, you know, well, first of all, you know, I think there's federal funding in there, like you guys said, but the other thing too is just viability across the state of Vermont and equity is, you know, those two things are oxymoronic, because I'm not really seeing those programs produce equitable outcomes, and I think some of that concerns me with what we're talking about now, because what we don't want to do is replicate something that's not serving us equitably. So I just wanted to flag that as a concern. You know, I was talking to Travis Marcotte about something similar to this. That's Intervale director. Something similar to this. Gene, you and I were sitting in on one of their board meetings, and we were talking about this as well. And we know that with all of their efforts, still only 0.2% farmland belong to Black folks across the state. So something's not working there. So I don't want to replicate that. I want to be very careful about what we're doing in this work. That's all I have for now. Thanks.
Do you know how to
Sit.
do you know I don't know. Do you know how to avoid that problem? The inequitable outcomes of the VSJF, or I mean,
You know, I don't. I'm going to go to Gene because I think Gene's probably better positioned to speak to it. But I honestly, I have no clue, because it's like I'm in over my head as is. And I just, you know, what I know is we got to figure out how to do something different, because it's what I know for sure is that the outcomes are definitely inequitable, and it's problematic. And we've been doing the same thing for years and years. And it feels like it's pretty safe to say that it is consistently not producing good equitable outcomes.
Yeah, I can jump in. I think that I love this prompt because it really like brings the elephant into the room, or names the elephant that's in the room, which is like any kind of tinkering and support of that we do of the cannabis industry is not going to create like population-wide equity within the industry, because the industry is so disproportionately like hard to engage with as a disadvantaged person. So, you know, the need for capital, the highly regulatory environment, like all of this means that we will almost always, in these conditions, like we'll have very few people of color participating in this market until the market is more stabilized. And if and ever this magical thing happens where like, wow, there really is a lot of opportunity for craft producers and there is like robust support. So to me, what this speaks to is like, yes, let's build the best kind of business support and viability planning we can. And I do have growing faith in the Farm Viability Network because they at least have the self-awareness to know like, oh yeah, these equity metrics that Reverend Hughes was just talking about are our problem too, and they are working to understand and progress in how they can better serve the community. So I have faith that that work is progressing, but none of that addresses what equity actually means in the context of a legalized recreational cannabis market, where we are trying to move forward with acknowledgement of the incredible disproportionate harm that the war on drugs had on Black and brown communities. And so this is all great. Like I do this for my job, so I'm happy to talk about this. But what I hope we really talk about is like, okay, how do we put teeth into the Community Reinvestment Fund? Because that is where our communities know best how to center and serve our communities. And that is where, you know, we can actually empower our people to speak up and lead and create initiatives that really do work to get Black people on land and really do work to create the economic conditions that someone could start a business like this. My concern from like a strategic point of view is that because of many things, including racism, that the legislature will, if we give them these options of like, here's all our thoughts on the business development fund, and it's going to cost, I can't remember, 5 to 10% plus these $600,000. And we really recommend this cannabis community reinvestment fund at 20%. You know, like they will very likely say, great, we can do this business development fund, and this community reinvestment fund is questionable and we need more time and we're going to think about it some more. And so having, like, I am excited to have a good plan for how to do a real cannabis business development fund that is using our best practices and our best people. But I am very concerned and curious about how do we appropriately weight then our recommendations around a community reinvestment fund. Because again, like no amount of tinkering in the cannabis business space is actually going to address the community need and the needs for like what does investment look like that actually supports equity, considering the impacts of the war on drugs. Like this, in this condition, in this marketplace, with where we are with federal, you know, criminalization and all that, it's just not going to address equity meaningfully.
I'm with you.
Yeah.
And I think that how you make that transition puts people on that hook. Like, you know, like because they wrote into their law that we want to help people from communities that have been disproportionately impacted. Now they said by cannabis prohibition, and to me that's like such narrow casting that like, you know, it's almost worthless to even say that, like because really it's not cannabis prohibition. It's the entire war on drugs.
I mean, sorry, we can just say cannabis prohibition.
No,
just even that has had such huge disproportionate effects.
It has, so. Yeah. But I also just feel like it's just, you know, it ties our hands at the board because we have to go with what's written there. Because if we start to expand beyond it, you know, if we get challenged, then a judge is going to be like, well, why did you take what they wrote here and go in this, like, you know, do this thing. So I think the transition, which we've said in the past, you know, here is just this, like the Cannabis Business Development Fund, certainly helpful for the social equity, the people that have been harmed by cannabis prohibition in the cannabis industry that have, you know, the wherewithal to join it. But certainly not addressing the things that you think it is, like cannabis equity in the cannabis industry, or even an attempt at equity in the cannabis industry is is really like insignificant compared to in proportion to the harm that was perpetrated. So I think we need to do the Cannabis Business Development Fund piece and then have a very strong transition towards community reinvestment.
I had like an aha,
Yeah.
which is, I'm curious what everyone here thinks, is maybe instead of having a separate community reinvestment recommendation, we embed the community reinvestment into the Cannabis Business Development Fund. And we say, hey, there's two components of this fund. There's the part that's going to be contracted out for the business TA. And then there's, something like a $5 million pot of money that is going to be contracted out to support economic justice and reinvestment in communities that have been harmed disproportionately by what is the term we're supposed to use? Cannabis prohibition. So then it's not like an either or, it's all in the business development fund. It's all in the scope of what we were assigned to work on. And we're saying that this is about business development. It's about business development and economic development for the communities that have been harmed and have had their economic opportunities ripped away from them by the prohibition of cannabis.
By the prohibition of cannabis is the phrase that I really feel like we need to avoid.
Oh, sorry. I'm sorry. I thought that's what we're supposed to.
That's what's in the law right now.
Yeah.
But just because of the shoddy data that we have over arrests and, we have 97 different law enforcement police departments, they all code cannabis differently. They all have different ways of identifying who's been we are going to get tied in circles trying to define which communities should be the beneficiaries of that $5 million or whatever, the community reinvestment. I think we should just say into communities that have been disproportionately harmed by government-led activities or something, state and federal drug laws or something, it's just, it's really hard in this state because of our population and because of just our lack of record keeping to figure out which communities around the state have been disproportionately impacted. Even the ACLU, if you go to their kind of disproportionate impact on drug arrests, has a bunch of, not enough data in Vermont to really show.
Got it. So the fact that Black and Hispanic people are named as a social equity class.
We did that because we couldn't think of anything better.
Got it. Okay. So.
And we use national data, really.
Yeah.
I mean. Yeah.
Okay. I guess what I intended was for anyone that is a social equity class would be eligible.
But it also doesn't address redlining or any of the other tools in the toolbox. It seems to me like you really want to broaden the aperture when it comes to community reinvestment as to the intended recipients.
We had a long conversation about economic status and how to include that. And we really couldn't we couldn't come to a conclusion on how to include that in a way that was going to be helpful.
Mm-hmm. Got it. Okay.
So I don't mind.
I just wanted to make a statement, maybe, but on a practical, just because obviously from our end on administrative end, it's really practical for us to deal with the social equity when it comes to the cannabis business, and anything larger than that is way beyond our scope. Or not really.
I totally understand that, and I actually have some slides that I was going to present at the last meeting. But we ran out of time, that I can just show you how some of the other states do this. And it's not pretty anywhere. I can tell you that, but I do want to say that I think what this working group has identified pretty quickly is what a lot of states experience is, which is Colorado did not have any equity provisions at all. And they found very quickly that it was only benefiting the people that were already pretty well off to begin with, that were never impacted by cannabis prohibition or anything. It was just, the rich got richer, everyone else kind of suffered. So Massachusetts implemented the nation's first social equity program, which was meant to kind of put the people that have been harmed by cannabis prohibition at the front of the line, and give them some financial support because of all the access to capital issues. And that was well and good, but I think a lot of people are now realizing kind of what you've raised, which is this is never going to be a totally equitable industry because of all of the harm that's been done, not just from by cannabis prohibition, but for any number of kind of activities. And so forget about social equity in the cannabis industry, although it is important. we need to be investing money into community reinvestment in those. Forget about giving people cannabis licenses. Let's give them childcare and healthcare, like these communities that have been so harmed. Let's just do the things that are actually needed there. And so that's the trajectory of kind of New York and Illinois and all the more recent cannabis states, Maryland. So I've got just a few examples here that I wanted to show last time about how this could be structured. And I think that it's kind of a little bit ridiculous to structure it this way in Vermont. So New York, you can just see here, 40% of the cannabis revenue, excise tax revenue, is going to this community grants reinvestment. The purpose is to provide grants to community-based nonprofit organizations for reinvesting in communities disproportionately affected by federal and state drug policies. There's the kind of things that they're supposed to be targeting: job placement, job skills, adult education, mental health treatment, substance use disorder, housing, financial literacy, community banking. I won't read the whole thing. New York, after a very slow start, is on track to have over $1 billion in taxable sales. So 40% of that is a very significant amount of money. I mean, I know it's a much bigger state, but I think if we tried to kind of chop up our tax revenue, even if it was 70%, unapportioned 70% of the excise tax into all those different services, it would be kind of too distributed to actually make real impactful change in any one of them. But and then who gets to do it? Who gets to decide how the money is spent? You have this cannabis advisory board, 13 voting members that are appointed by the governor, who has 7 appointments. Pro tem of the Senate and Speaker of the Assembly have 3 appointments. You have statewide geographic representation of the other members, experts in behavioral. So you create this like big board to do it. And I'm not saying that that's wrong, but that's how they do it in New York.
Is that the sole purpose of the board, is to administer those grants? Got it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Then they have I've got information about who's allowed to apply: nonprofits who provide services for young people. They decided to focus on young people first. And just some information about what activities will be funded, how much will be distributed. So the first grant opportunity is $5 million with a $100,000 max per grantee. And then how they score the applications. This seems to me like a lot of bureaucracy. So to your point, Tim, like if we did something like this would probably be beyond what ACCD would be asked, I think. California. Yeah. So California, $10 million, and then increasing by $10 million each fiscal year until it hits $50 million every year thereafter. So you can see California's program started a while ago, but they only kind of brought in this concept of community reinvestment kind of after the fact. It's distributed by the Agency of Economic Development, consultation with the Workforce and Labor, Department of Labor. The purpose is to support local health departments, community-based nonprofits for job placement, mental health, substance use disorder treatment. There's always a nexus kind of with drug laws, I feel like, and criminalization of people because of drug distribution or drug use. Kind of just some eligibility criteria, the kind of grantee award amounts, and then just some reporting deadlines, some priorities. Illinois, relatively new state when it comes to cannabis legalization. So you can see they've got the Criminal Justice Information Authority as kind of one of the people awarding grants. This is clearly aimed at economic divestment violence the impacts of the criminal justice system generally, to reduce gun violence. Everyone kind of has their own basic kind of what they're trying to solve with this grant making program. And then this is what I would hopefully want to avoid, is just this like 15, 20 member committee that's kind of fighting over this money for their own kind of,
so political. So look at that.
And then just kind of some more about the board. They have to develop 12 regions, and they have to kind of identify how much money is going to go to each region. And then I did actually just find, after I did some of this work, I noticed that there is a website that just lays it all out, every state with community reinvestment. So instead of me trying to, after I like just search, just talked to our Canada members and found all the, but essentially I can just share this website, but this in one page kind of lays out all the states that do community reinvestment, how much, what their mission is, how much money they've given to date. So you can see a lot of the newer states, Connecticut, New Jersey started the same time as us, New York, Maryland very recently opened up, Delaware hasn't quite opened yet. They all have a community reinvestment component to it. So like Vermont has already lost traction as far as kind of like being on the vanguard of, this idea of community reinvestment. So I think trying to make the case there is going to be important, but I don't think that we should ignore the kind of existing businesses that are in the market, the existing social equity businesses that are in the market that really are struggling.
Totally.
Mark?
So yeah, you're absolutely right. Now, just for the sake of time, because I know we're like 10 minutes into the second hour already, and we got still quite a bit to cover, but it's the community reinvestment component of what we're doing here. Its absence is it's not due to lack of just probably about 4 or 5 years of effort towards that, just by for members are on the call, Jeffrey's on the call. I don't know if Graham's on the call. No, he's not, but we've been trying to get that done. What can I say? I think I agree with you. I don't want to create another body to do this work. I think Susanna said it best. She was like, not another board, right? I think just. And the other thing too is we just got to get out of the language of, like you said, talking about what cannabis has done, and start talking about what we have done, what people have done. So I like the language. Of course, we've already had this conversation. It's not a surprise that I think the Land Access Opportunity Board is best positioned to take this on. In fact, I'm looking at some of their enabling statute right now, and I'm also looking at the Sunrise report in the language that's used in there. And we don't really have to recreate the wheel to talk about the demographic of folks that we're trying to serve here. We don't have to, figure out what we want to say about what we're trying to do either. Because I think at the heart of the challenges is, it's just economics. I mean, it's you've got land. You've got access to capital, but it all really comes down to economics. And we know that the median wealth of a Black family is 1/13 that of a white family, and that's and that was a few years ago. I mean, we should probably run that number down. It's probably even more scary. We know that only 0.2% of the farmland in the state of Vermont is owned by Black folks. We know that too. I think and looking at some of the language here, just for example, like just I'm looking at the definitions in the enabling statute. This is just for those who want to look it up. It's a section 22 of, I think it's like Act 182 in 2022. Historically marginalized or disadvantaged community means a community that has been historically historically suffered from discrimination and has not had equal access to public or private economic benefits due to race, ethnicity, gender, geography, language preference, immigration or citizen status, sexual orientation, take a breath, gender identity, socioeconomic status, disability status, its members. So that's one way to look at it. I think, again, I mentioned the Sunrise report. I'm not going to rattle that off, but I like what you said about community reinvestment being clumped in with what we're doing. I don't want to. What I don't want to do is make the mistake of just getting stuck with talking about this whole idea of community reinvestment in terms of addressing the Black community because of drugs. So I just want to make sure that we're not narrowing things like that. And I know that there's some concern about constitutional challenges, but we survived that with Act 182, 2022, and the Sunrise report and the work that's underway with the Land Access Opportunity Board. And I think because of that survival, I think it's merited and it's wise for us to look to what's already passed the litmus test. That look to that body that's already doing the work and that's already, we've already been in. We've had we got called to the principal's office on the budget already. We got through that. They're gonna fund the LAOB. Don't tell anybody. But so I think that there's, the board is accepted by this administration, and the purpose of the board is accepted by this administration. It's palatable, and I don't believe there's any constitutional challenges to the scope of the work that the board is doing.
Yeah, and just so I'm clear, it hasn't been challenged in court yet. It's just you've done an analysis, right? I mean, I read the report too, that it would probably survive strict scrutiny. That was what was in the report. Yeah. Well, I'm totally with you, Mark. I mean, in no surprise there, because you and I have spoken about this at length over a number of years. But I would very much think in this report, just kind of having a transition that says this market will never be truly equitable until we have economic equity in the state more broadly, something along those lines. The board has already kind of made this recommendation over the course of a number of years that's been falling on deaf ears or just tight budget cycles or whatever else. I mean, and then show that kind of transition that I described where kind of states come to that realization over a number of years that equity in the cannabis industry is never going to be equitable until there's economic equity, and how New York and Illinois and Washington, California, and all these other states kind of came to that same conclusion, and they put real money behind this, not just kind of, lip service money. And that we as a state have already defined certain areas of equity that we would like to focus on already. Like before we even create this kind of community reinvestment fund, we have the Land Access and Opportunity Board. We have the Health Equity Advisory Commission. We have the Racial Disparities in Criminal and Juvenile Justice System. Suzanne and I couldn't find anything around economic development equity, but maybe there's something. And sorry, Suzanne, for calling this an initiative. I know your office is not an initiative, it's an office, but this is kind of about equity in state government policy. And I think that all 5 of these areas do have a direct nexus with the war on drugs more broadly, not just cannabis prohibition. So I don't think that there's going to be any.
Let me read something else into the record, just for the record, okay? And I'm hearing what you're saying, but I just wanted to just get a moment just to read something out of the Sunrise report into the record, just so we can have it on the record, please. And that's it says that, and this is in the opening, the executive summary of the report of the Sunrise report of the Land Access Opportunity Board. It says the work ahead is extensive, and is in this initial report, the board is recommending programs and investments to address opportunities across all areas of authority designated to it, in Act 182. The board believes that equitable access to decent, safe, and secure housing, land, and land-based enterprise is a human right that all inhabitants of Vermont should fully enjoy without the historical and existing barriers that keep persons from historically marginalized and disadvantaged communities from realizing these objectives. The need for action now to protect Vermonters from historically marginalized and disadvantaged communities is all the more urgent in the wake of COVID-19 pandemic, the economic shock that the pandemic caused, the contraction of available housing and rental stock and resulting sharp increase in cost. So I'll stop there, but and I don't even know if that was what I was supposed to read, but there's language here within, you know, what we already have on record that yeah, I'll leave it there, but I guess what I'm getting at here is that there's a charge that this group, and maybe I'll come back later and maybe I'll find what I was actually looking for. I think that kind of goes towards it. And then of course, you know, the other thing that you were, you probably mentioned it already, but we do have, you know, JR 113 as well, which is, you know, racism is a public health emergency joint legislative resolution, which really spoke to the legislature's commitment to address systemic racism, the impacts of systemic racism. So yeah, I think that we might be able to, you know, when we go back and make that recommendation, is maybe just reference some of this work that we've been doing. Yeah, there was one other thing I was going to say, but it slips. But I'll come back as soon as it comes back to me. But I think that I'll just leave it there for now. Thanks.
Yeah.
I have a couple more notes to add if you
Yeah.
can. I think that I really love how we're strategizing. Like, how do we actually get this reinvestment fund funded this year? I think naming it in the context of the business development fund is really strategic. Like, this is really about economic empowerment. That's what community reinvestment literally means, is like, it's an economic investment. I think to whatever extent this working group is comfortable naming the Land Access and Opportunity Board, it makes it easier for the legislature to say, oh, okay, we get this, because as Mark was saying, we exist, people are familiar with us, we have a proven track record, we're doing work, we have a purpose of grant making, we have community oversight. It's not an imaginary thing that takes development, and it gives the legislature and the administration an opportunity to invest in a thing that they're being asked to invest in otherwise. So it's kind of like a missing puzzle piece that I imagine has been missing the last few years when you've tried to make this case. And yeah, as Reverend Hughes was reading from the Sunrise Report, land access and housing access is the foundation of economic prosperity, you know, and that's really how we see land and housing access. Like, yes, there is something sacred about land access and housing access, but it's sacred because it is the centerpiece of all kinds of thriving, and particularly the wealth and economy that people need to have health and food and, you know, beloved.
I think I found it.
Yeah,
I think I found what I was looking for. Gene, I appreciate you. If I could, please, I found what I was looking for. And to your point, it's you know, it is the cornerstone. I mean, generational wealth has everything to do with land and home ownership, period. And generational wealth is, you know, it's the key that unlocks the racially disparate outcomes across all social determinants of health, period. So what I was going to say is to your response, that the research that you and Susana did on economic justice, it just occurred to me that yes, we've actually had a bill that's been on the wall in House General for 2 consecutive biennium on economic justice. This last biennium, it was referred to as H448, and in it goes through there's a bunch of I'm not going to go through all of them, but there's 10 different things that it tries to do, ranging from establishing a Department of Cultural Empowerment and Economic Advancement, directing programming implementation through statewide cultural empowerment and economic advancement network, creating a state fund to fund this, a grant program associated with it, implementing a grant program for qualified organizations, providing programming, which includes business cultivation and support programming, personal and professional development, wealth development and management and planning. There's direction of the creation of a BIPOC business development office, creation of a business procurement program, that's statewide business procurement program, creating pathways for career advancement for current and future employees of the state, as well as designing and implementing education and apprenticeship programs for members of BIPOC communities. This is, again, a policy that's been on the wall in House General, and I think it was over in Mike Marcotte's committee for a minute, not this past biennium, but before that, because I know I was able to push it out of Tom Stevens' committee over into economics, but it never was taken up. So I do realize that we don't have anything on the books, but it's not for lack of trying.
So I think that having more of a narrow mission and I know it's not narrow, the job of the LAOB, but at least it doesn't create, we're not talking about a huge sum of money here, and it doesn't create, and when you start chopping it up between, 6 or 7 different initiatives, it becomes even less impactful for any one of those. So I do like the idea of kind of just saying you determine land access is a priority, equitable land access is a priority. And
to be clear, our mandate is land and housing. So, and that's important because it's
Housing
very
is key.
Yeah, so our mandate is equitable land and housing access.
I see a direct nexus between the war on drugs and the inequitable distribution of housing, and it probably needs to be more clearly, that line needs to probably be more clearly drawn for the legislature.
I see a direct nexus between Act 250 and the inequity in housing ownership. And I mean, the war on drugs is like pie in the sky, and everybody likes to say it and it's cute. But Act 250, we've had testimony in A&R, in was it Julie Moore's committee or something like that? It's on record. It never crossed over because it got flushed out, and that was in 2019 when we had a 50-year review of Act 250 that didn't have one word in it about equity, not one. But yet and still we've got a land access, a land use law that was put on the books in 1968, 1970, that, not only, we got a good talk about how it created a cap on housing, and folks are finally trying to figure that out. But it also created a cap on the population, and therefore the growth, and as a result, the potential for economic expansion for the state. But because of the economic implications, in this 27-member governor-appointed group of folks that have been managing it for the last 50 years, it has also managed to keep Black and brown folks out of the state of Vermont. And I think as a result of that, what we know is if you're not here, it's kind of hard to buy something. And if you don't buy something, you can't get generational wealth. So I mean, we need to talk about the broader implications of what's real and present. And this has got to be on record in what we're talking about, because we're reaching when we're talking about the war on drugs, and everybody's trying to figure that out. But everybody's having a full-blown conversation about Act 250 because they're worried about housing. So here's the thing: is that I believe strongly, I believe this with all my heart, that if we're having a conversation about Act 250 on housing over here, but we're not having a conversation about Act 250 over here when we're talking about economic development and why Black and brown folks are not in the state or have generational wealth in the state, then there's a disconnect. We need to connect all of that together. Does that make this? Am I making any sense, or do I sound like a Martian?
No, I mean, I understand what you're saying, but the like the amount of explanation that needs to go into that in a report like this, I think it's just easier for people to say, this is cannabis excise tax money. So they're like, you know, it's just like there's a nexus between supporting the communities that have been harmed by the war on drugs. When you bring Act 250 into it, then you have to draw these kind of lines and these paths. I mean, I know you can do it, Mark, but it's just like there's an easier path here. This is money that, you know, this is drug money. And so let's just solve the problem that we had with there was some of the consequences of the war on drugs with this new pot of drug money, you know, like it's just a little bit clearer of a line. When you see all these community reinvestment funds, you see that all of the kind of things that they're spending it on are related to the harms that were perpetrated because of the war on drugs.
Yeah, I apologize. The thing is the reason why I fly off the handle on that is like, you know, again, the war on drugs is not something that everybody can readily relate to. You know, our legislators and how they understand it and whether they believe it or whether or not it's quantifiable and all that other stuff that goes into it. And besides, you know, as you've always said, you know, it's only one of the many tools that have been used of systemic oppression to create these economic disparities. And the economic disparities is really what we're talking about. And that's the reason why I shot off like that. So I'm going to just step back for a minute and make some space for the rest of the group to deliberate on this. But I just believe strongly that if we're going to talk about this, we got to talk about it economically. And if we're going to talk about it economically, then it needs to go back to land and it needs to go back to home ownership, because that's where generational wealth is developed. And Act 250 has every freaking thing to do with that. So that's all I'm really saying.
Sorry. Yeah. I mean, I'm not going to dispute that claim. I think we all understand how zoning has been used historically, and, you know, Act 250 in particular. But I would just say that I think people understand that the consequence of having a criminal history record is lack of opportunity for education, lack of opportunity for economic prosperity, like underemployment, unemployment,
lack of opportunity for housing,
lack of opportunity
housing
for
you
housing.
can't get if you have a felony.
I think that is an easier line to draw.
A lot of times the reason why you have a criminal record is because you don't have economic viability. Okay.
Yeah.
Those folks that have generational wealth, they don't have criminal records because they can defend themselves in court. So I mean, I think you got the cart in front of the horse a little bit on this one. I mean, I respect that, and I respect what you're saying, and I appreciate you. I don't mean to seem crazy argumentative, but I'm just saying, you know, economics is at the heart of all of this. The reason why any exist in any of these systems has everything to do with the money. If you got generational wealth and you got $1 million or a few $1 million to throw around, when the police stop you and it comes time to go to court, you're going to be okay.
Right. And what is the tool that they use at that police stop? It's smell of marijuana. It's the drugs in your car. It's the, you know, that. So I'm just saying, like, there is a line that the kind of criminal justice reformers are very familiar with, that the kind of lack of economic opportunity for Black and brown communities has been the war on drugs. So let's try and use some of this cannabis money to reinvest in establishing some more economic opportunity for the people that have been most harmed. I just
wanted to be on record as saying that, you know, we tried that argument. Okay. So I just want to be on record as saying emphatically that it's been for the last 4 years, we've been trying a similar argument. And You know, and I can start calling off legislators' names if you want to.
No, it's all right.
Assure you that they ain't hearing it.
I agree with you. I know that, but I do think that all right. Well, I mean, I just feel like when you add all the layers in, people's eyes glaze over. I mean, I've just seen it happen a million times. It's just like, okay, so what do you want me to do? It's like kind of like the problem is too big. I don't know what to do. And
yeah,
so
I get it. And I know we're kind of off topic a little bit, and I know we need to get back on, but I would just say that part of the challenge that we're having in some of the work that we're doing is that nobody's really willing to connect all of the dots. And we're saying one thing in this committee and we're saying something else in that committee, and it's not connecting. And right now, I believe with all of my heart that if anybody's paying if any legislator is paying attention to what's going on, they're paying attention to language surrounding Act 250. Yeah. Because there's a conversation about housing, and all of a sudden the light has come on in everybody's head, and there is an ongoing conversation, and this has been going on for the last 2 biennium, that finally somebody has begun to focus in on the damage that Act 250 has done. But nobody wants to talk about the fact that when you create an exclusionary policy, at the end of the day, you end up hurting everybody. Nobody wants to have that conversation. So that's what, I want to admit that I do have a motive behind what I'm saying, because it's incredibly important that we talk about this, because we're never going to be able to get to the point to when we talk about Act 250 that we actually talk about the harm that it caused. The harm that it caused to marginalized communities. The only thing we want to talk about is the harm that it caused to everybody in terms of the shortage of housing. But we don't want to talk at the same time about the harm that it's caused to marginalized communities.
Yeah. Nathan, I just want to, you had your hand raised for a little bit.
Yeah, so I'm just curious. We talked about the purchasing of land or land access through the Community Reinvestment Fund, but also the housing side of things. So do you foresee the Community Reinvestment Fund doing land acquisition and establishing land leases, and then also doing the housing or commercial building development on top of that? And is that like essential for it to land at the LAOB?
Is that a question for the LAOB or for?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. I mean, how I would imagine, and we have not done a lot of strategic planning around this, what would happen if this money came in, but the activities that we currently do are myriad in terms of reinvesting and empowering disadvantaged communities to gain equitable access to housing and land. And so that, can include down payment assistance grants on land or homes. It can include technical assistance for developers who want to develop creative community housing projects that include land and housing, or more directly serve the needs that are currently being unmet in the existing housing infrastructure. It can also include investing in and resourcing community centers that are providing direct housing coaching and housing technical assistance to individual citizens. And making sure that our community centers that are representative of these disadvantaged communities are strong enough and have the sort of ecosystem. We have an ecosystem of mounting infrastructure that supports these communities leading ourselves. And so what I would imagine is that if these funds came into the LAOB, is that we would deploy them in those ways. For me, listening to you, Reverend Hughes, when you read the portions of the economic justice bill that had been proposed, I could also imagine pulling out that language of the useful purposes of that bill and saying, this Community Reinvestment Fund is intended to do these things, and we have a body already, a state body that is the LAOB, that is fundamentally about giving disadvantaged communities decision-making power over the resources that they want to invest in their communities. So let's move those funds into that body. There is community oversight and decision-making that has already been navigated and structured out within the LAOB. And there's a very close match and marriage between all of the things we've talked about, like who has been harmed by all kinds of systemic policies of discrimination, specifically within those that we have also been harmed by cannabis prohibition. I think there are plenty of data points we could tie back. And that harm is fundamentally an economic harm, which is why it makes sense to include in a business development fund. And LAOB serves these communities in a fundamentally economic way, because of the emphasis in building up the community's power to enact housing and land access equity.
Keeping it flexible, allowing them to do that decision making for their town or community. Yeah, that sounds great. I mean, as a past affordable housing developer, more flexibility in the funding that's allowed, the better. Seems to be a rarity, but yeah, answer my question. Thank you.
Thank you, Nathan.
Tim?
Yeah, I just want to kind of reiterate what's going on here. We're also thinking strategically, trying to get something through the legislature, right? To actually have, and I think the housing path, obviously, it's the hot button item, and so I think having that as your main point here, it's going to actually allow them to maybe create this fund. That just putting that out there. I think that's, you have to think, how you're going to make a win here. And I don't know if you're aware of this too. It's not a huge economic development piece that we have, but we do have a BIPOC business assistance program at ACCD, and we actually contract with the Vermont Professionals of Color Network to provide business support and development, as well as career development. And that's, I think we continue for that. We're going to keep that ask going and hopefully grow that. But that could always, that's a great place to put more money into and help them grow and be more influential in that realm. So,
Tim, can I ask you something?
Sure.
Let's just say Cannabis Business Development Fund stays separate from a community reinvestment fund. So they've got different missions.
Yeah.
And do you feel, based upon what we have further up in this report, that ACCD is well positioned to be the kind of, do the kind of work of contracting with the central administrator and establishing this network of advisors? And it doesn't have to look just like this, obviously, but are you well positioned to kind of be
Okay.
I
think, to actually create that contract, to maintain the contract. And I think that the great thing here is the scope of work is something that we can run by this group now, right? We can actually create something that people all feel like, hey, this is going to make a difference here, and administer the contract, get it out there and select. Again, we can utilize portions of this group to help select the appropriate contractors and make sure that it's the scope of work and what they're about to accomplish, and the funding is there. We have no problem doing that, running the contracts. And I think maybe the community reinvestment might have to be a grant program. I'm just looking at it. I don't know if that's it might be something where you contract it all out, and it's a pass through. And I think as LAOB, have they done any pass through funding? That they're willing to go that route. That's a big task, right? And then monitoring state funds is administering. The grant administration is not a fun thing, right? So
our funding is all state appropriations at this point, and we are administratively housed within the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board. So we have the whole financial administrative management capacity of VHCB.
But have you given out grants to other entities and then administered those?
Oh, got it. I see. As the LAOB, not yet, but in life I have. So
yeah,
I know what
right,
we're up for.
and I think that's where it's just going to go. But that can be all done in a scope of work. But to answer your question, I think this can totally be done. I think on both ends. So
okay. So then I think that the path forward here, just because we are running short on time, and I think this is going to be our last meeting. It doesn't have to be. I think from here on out, it's kind of individual meetings to try and like just flesh it out and then send the report around for just final comment. But and you know, Tim, I know if your office can't take an official position on this, but because it's the CCB's report in consultation with you, so it doesn't. You don't have to kind of take credit for these recommendations. It can just be
yeah.
Just because I know
We
when
will,
it comes to
if they like them, we will.
okay, yeah, that's totally fine.
Okay.
But so I think the pathway here is to kind of suggest that there would be some money for this part of the project, and then say that, you know, there's never going to be equity in the way that you think that there's going to be based upon what you've done with this Cannabis Business Development Fund in this market. True equity comes from everyone having economic equity from the foundation, from the bottom up, however we want to phrase that. Show that that's what every state that has a cannabis program is starting to realize throughout the country, that that's the real issue that we need to address. We've already kind of come to that conclusion with these somewhat unfunded mandates. We think that the most important one to focus on, the one that will have the biggest impact, is the LAOB, and their mission is in line with the harm that was perpetrated by the war on drugs or cannabis prohibition or state and federal drug policy. And then the recommendation would be to invest a portion of the excise tax to achieve the mission of the LAOB. And I think that I mean, that's just the framework. We need to kind of really make the kind of moral case for it to, you know, get people to come on board with that idea. So I guess my remaining questions are, do we want a specific dollar amount for this portion of the recommendation, or do we want a percentage of the excise tax? And I personally think
a dollar percentage.
What's that?
Could you give us like what would be like a 5% percentage of last year?
There was 18 million last year. I think 2 million of that had to cover the gap for our budget. So, and then 30% of what was left over after they kind of paid our budget was given to prevention efforts in the state. So the whatever 70% of around 16 million is.
Okay, so let's call it 15. So 30% would have been 5, right? So
yeah. So
okay.
For a
So I just strategically, I think it's better to ask for a dollar amount, because we're dealing with this right now. I mean, I've heard people talk about it with the after school funding, which is just the entirety of the sales tax. And so it's going into a special fund at AOA. AOA has to kind of distribute it to after school programs. After school programs, they just like, they're not asking for all of it. They don't know what to do with the excess. It's just a weird sort of system. It's not based upon any sort of actual need. It's just, you know, whatever grants they get. I don't know. Like, I feel like saying we want X amount of dollars to do this work might be more strategic, but I don't have a strong preference one way or the other.
I've got a thought on that, Pepper. I think that I think we should stick with what's already been established. The prevention folks, and this is as a result of the Marijuana Commission's studies, asked for a percentage, and I think we should be consistent with that. So they're not like switching it up. Say, well, we're giving you a percentage, but we're giving you this amount. The other thing too is the hope is as the market grows, that we would also mature, and at some point or another, we probably would be coming back asking for additional funds to expand the program, and that might be that might be covered, you know, with the if it's a percentage as opposed to locking ourselves in on a hard number. If we just said, hey, give us, you know, we'd like 3 million, and then we find out that the expansion of the program may take us to $4 million in a couple of years, then we're back with our hands out again in the legislature. So those are my thoughts.
Okay.
Do you want to remain consistent then with the percentages that the first report we submitted, whatever it was, 2021, yeah. Was for both the Cannabis Business Development Fund and a broader sort of community impact.
That was in total 20% for both?
I don't remember. It's
Right.
further up in
I don't know
Peppers.
Right.
I don't know
It
if we
was to 10 for
We
business
did both.
development here and
20% and yeah.
5 to 10.
Yeah,
think
we have-
And this is the first biennial. That's the same number that we put in the 21 or 2022. I can't remember now. The first report that we did.
there's a little bit of a weirdness to just, they don't know what 5% or 20% is going to be until the fiscal year closes. And you're going to be always a year behind as to what that 20% is. Because they're not going to calculate it based upon a projection. They're going to calculate it on the actual from the year before.
Okay.
So, yeah.
So could we do a dollar amount that is 20% of last year and a dollar amount that's 5 or 10% of last year? And then, I assume like every year when the budget is drafted, you go and say, okay, this year it's 3% more,
Yeah.
2% more, whatever the cost of because the cost of administering these programs will go up, presumably.
Well, we can, considering ACCD probably and Susanna's office probably don't have, well, I don't know, but we can talk about that offline, but that's an open question. I think that, if we're going to make a recommendation, whether we want a percentage or a dollar amount, if we want to specify allowable uses or just to achieve the mission of the LAOB, something along those lines. Or if we want to say for giving grants to, secure housing, what sort of oversight, or just describe the oversight that you have already, I think would be helpful. And then this was back when I thought maybe it gets split amongst these initiatives. But so I don't know if we're going to just focus on LAOB.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I just wanted to ask a clarifying question. This section of recommendations is for the broader community impact. The other recommendations above were for the Cannabis Business Development Fund.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yep. So then I think for me, the next steps are, Tim, I'd like to schedule a meeting with you to kind of just work through what the exact kind of slides will look like here and make sure they're compatible with your operational kind of structure. And then I think I'd like to do a meeting with Gene and Ornella about this community reinvestment. And Mark, you probably want to be there too, because really we need to just make the case that, make the kind of logical case that the Cannabis Business Development Fund is not going to kind of really achieve the equity goals of the cannabis legislation.
Yeah, I can do that. Thanks. Can I just go back to that, the equity initiatives? I don't know that you said it or not, but that we're not calling the Office of Racial Equity an initiative, right?
No, sorry.
As far as the Land Access Opportunity Board, because their role in what it is that we're trying to establish, I feel strange about naming them as an initiative and asking them to administer the redevelopment or the Cannabis Community Investment Fund at the same time. I guess what I'm getting at is yeah, they are funded by, general funds, and they could be, Gene, I don't know. What do you think about that? He's listing as an initiative, but you're also would be administering the.
I think Yeah, my interpretation of this section is it was like internal facing for us.
Yes, yeah.
And that initiative is not quite the right
These
word.
are, and it's not the right word. These are the kind of initiatives that the legislature has done, you know, in order to address
Can I just-
equity.
These are bodies that are already doing the work.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right,
It's-
yeah.
They're agency is probably not the right word, but they're
No.
all bodies that are already doing
Right.
this equity work
Okay.
Yes.
versus
that sounds good.
initiatives.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, all right. I think we've got a plan moving forward. Again, this is due January 15th. And so I think I'll just try and set up some kind of one-off meetings and get something. And I hope to have the report drafted in time for everyone and have one last look at it before the 15th.
Okay, and we can try to pull together some of the like case points of the
Yeah.
making the connection and the oversight issue. I would love to just make one more little plug for my AHA idea, which is I think like the closer we can put the community reinvestment to the business development fund,
Yeah.
the more favorably it will be seen. And it is like the whole thing you said about, oh, the cannabis market will never be equitable because of that. I think we could just say because of the economic disempowerment and therefore we want to economically, like
Right.
this is part of business development. It's the same thing. And we're just going to say there's like a part for this. And then something I'd love to say to Tim if he's still here. Oh yeah, there he is. Is I don't know if this was clear, but if the money came into ACCD and then you all like contracted or passed through to us, I would see that as a very favorable opportunity to work with your agency. So just to like, in terms of how the mechanics of this bill goes,
Yeah.
we don't need to name it as a separate appropriation to the LAOB. Like, I don't know what my colleagues from the LAOB think about this, but I would like to see us fostering more working relationship with ACCD. And if this is an opportunity to do that, and it's simple to say, the Business Development Fund includes these two parts, all of it's going to ACCD, and then ACCD is passing it through to LAOB. I think that is, you know,
Yeah.
could be a very
It's-
favorable and strategic.
It's certainly, I think, easier than creating a new special fund and
Yeah.
all the work that goes into kind of
Mhm.
addressing that and keeping track of it. And I think it is probably a path of least resistance.
Mhm.
Well, the only thing I'd caution about that is just the, you know, if there's any overhead associated with it, because, you know, I see so much money come out from the state and folks are putting 10% on it just for handling it. And nothing against Tim, but I'm just saying
We don't.
the number of hands, that's enough. I think since you said that, I can just be quiet.
No, we don't. We don't do anything with the flood mitigation or
Okay.
any of those, right? So,
Yeah, I think you got my point though, right? I mean, because that's,
Yeah.
I mean, it's worth saying, right?
no, I'm employed by the state for the money, Mark. So that's what I'm here for.
Damn.
But no, I think that is a great idea, and I think the big thing is as it's introduced, is keeping on top of the right of the correct language is very key, right? Because very key.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay. All right. Well, thanks everyone. I'm going to try and be in touch, hopefully before the end of this week, just given the holidays and everything that's going on, so that we can just kind of hammer out the final like details of this and make sure we're all on the same page.
Awesome.
All
Thank
right.
you, sir.
All right.
I'll adjourn the meeting. Thank you.
Happy holidays, everybody.
Thank you.
you.
Thanks, Charles.
Happy holidays to you too, Tim.
All right.